positive reaction so far after this, of course, increased output cuts. But before we go ahead, let me bring to the show my first guest this evening, live from Vienna, Youssef Alshammari, Editor-in-Chief, C Markets. Good evening, Youssef, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, good evening, Alexander. Very pleased to join you.
Youssef, I would like to start exactly with asking you, first of all, what do you think about these 500,000 additional output cuts? I mean, at the very beginning, as I was saying, analysts were expecting a lower number, kind of. What is your take on the topic? And secondly, do you believe this is going to be enough to stabilize markets?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, at the time we've arrived to OPEC, our expectations were of a cut extension of already a continued growth in the U.S. oil inventories, especially in the first half of 2020. And as we can see with the current cuts, then OPEC has seriously considered these the slow in the Chinese growth and expected the oil demand in 2020. So we believe the current cuts will certainly bring more stability to the market. It will add, of course, to the coherence of the OPEC Plus agreement. And until March 2020, we believe that would be sufficient, because as we have seen in the reaction of the market, it has been very bullish with the announcement of this agreement. So yeah, we believe that would be sufficient. And by the way, it's 1.7 plus voluntary cuts from Saudi Arabia, so that could bring it to 2.1 million barrels.
Absolutely. I was about to ask you, what do you think about these voluntary cuts coming from Saudi Arabia? Why are they doing that?
Saudi Arabia has always been making further cuts than what it's required to do. Of course, it leaves the markets with to avoid any oversupply in the market that could destabilize, cause any disruptions, and that's why I think this is quite important for Saudi Arabia. And it's also to take into account members that want to enhance their compliance with time, and I believe that's why Saudi Arabia is even cutting more than what it's required to do.
Well, during these 2 days of meeting, we've heard many analysts' opinions, and many of them think about the fact that actually OPEC is going to face further issues inside of the organization as a whole. What do you think about this? I mean, do you think this organization is going to be more, how can I say, united? Are we going to see more unity, and which are going to be the major goals for them in the upcoming months and also years?
The OPEC as an organization, certainly I would see the organization certainly united, and especially now with the OPEC Plus, continuing the cooperation between OPEC and OPEC is extremely important, and that's what we should see in 2020. If the agreement has resulted in good, of course, it has already been successful over the past 3 years, and that's subject to its success in March 2020, then I think as the benefit is reaped by all the members, then continuing the cooperation is extremely essential, and that's what I see the organization is very keen on, and all the members are, of course, as we can see, not just from the OPEC country, but also from the non-OPEC alliance. So I think, yes, coherence is available, and I think it should last throughout 2020.
On the other side, what is your opinion regarding global demand outlook in the upcoming quarters? I mean, demand has been major issues in 2019. What is the outlook for 2020 in your opinion?
Well, at C Markets, we have a demand under the continued negotiations. That is still no agreement between the US and China scenario, and that we expect a demand that is just about 1 million barrels of growth in 2020. If there is the good scenario where there's a good agreement between the US and China in the first half of 2020, then we expect demand to go by about 200,000 barrels. However, with the current further reductions from OPEC of about more than 1.7 million barrels in place right now, then even, especially in the first quarter of 2020, the slow in demand will not lead to any oversupply in the markets.
And on the other side, what do you think about the U.S. shale oil production? You know what's very interesting, that for 2019, actually, the United States have been a major exporter of crude oil, which is absolute surprise. I mean, this is a milestone for the country. Do you think it's going to have a big role on the energy markets and, of course, undoubtedly on pricing?
Well, the growth in shale oil is expected the next year. There is some sort of different opinions. If you look at some consulting firms, they think of a kind of a bullish, let's say, because the very slow growth in the U.S. shale of about 400,000 barrels growth. The IEA expects 1 million barrels. We at Sea Markets, we see a growth of about 1.3 million barrels next year. But certainly, everyone agrees that shale is slowing. And continuing, of course, the current agreements, which is until March 2020, and when OPEC, of course, OPEC will meet again for an extraordinary meeting in March 2020, and then they will assess how shale has grown in Q1 2020, and based on that, they will take a further decision whether to adjust the production based on the growth in shale. But we at Sea Markets, we see shale certainly slowing in 2020.
And on the other side, let's talk about really the longer term. Do you think the renewables are going to have some negative impact on oil price? And if yes, what exactly? When
it comes to oil and renewables, there is different. We need to look at them differently. Oil is mainly used in the transport sector. However, renewables can be important when it comes to replacing oil with electric mobility. But not all EVs currently, globally speaking, are supplied via renewables. You would see natural gas, you would see coal, as well as I don't see renewables as a competitor for crude oil, but certainly electric mobility, yes. But we think that the demand for oil will mainly be affected by the enhancement in efficiencies. That's in the future. Still, the internal combustion engines are greatly enhanced, and they use far less fuel than they are currently using, so that would kind of affect demand. In addition, you would see the replacement for electric vehicles by internal combustion. That would also lead to some reduction in demand in the next coming. But for power generation, oil is not mainly used for power generation.
And Youssef, let me ask you one last question. What is the oil price range that you expect, let's say, in the first quarter of 2020? Because, of course, this is something very interesting for our viewers.
Well, we used to see a price of about $58.5 for Brent and about $53.3 for WTI in Q1 before OPEC meeting today. With the current cuts in agreement, I think oil price for Brent will not be less than 60. In fact, we think it's going to be between 60 and 63. And for WTI, we see a price between 57 and 58 in Q1 2020.
All right, this is fantastic. Thank you very much, Youssef Alshammari, Editor-in-Chief, Sea Markets. Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Alexander. Thank you for having us.
Have a great evening, Youssef.
You too.
Well, let's go ahead because we have major story, but this time